Hello, everyone. My name is Moiz. A little bit about myself. I did my computer science master's degree from University of Kansas. Go Jayhawks. Anybody from University of Kansas? Okay. I wish we won NCAA. I would have been more proud, but we did still well. I work as a software engineer at Sauce Labs. I'm also a core contributor at Appium. And that's Moiz JV. That's where that's my GitHub handle. And if you have questions, you can email me after the talk at moiz@saucelabs.com. So today's agenda. I wanted to give you a brief introduction of what Appium is before I start, and I wanted to. So I have themed this talk on Back to the Future movie. Because I wanted to talk about why we did a rewrite of Appium codebase and why it will be a long sustaining project. And then I wanted to go about what were the motivations for the rewrite, why we did the rewrite, and then go into a little bit about into how the current Appium is, and what is the state of Appium right now, and what's the Appium future. But the most important thing I wanted to speak about is what are the lessons that we learned that you can apply in your own projects when you do a rewrite. How many of you here have a project that's a monolith and you're converting it into microservices, right? So we had the same problems, and I think we'll relate a lot. And then at the end, I wanted to show how you can contribute more to the Appium project and be part of the community and help it grow. So, how many of you have used Appium? Yeah, thank you. So, yes. So I'll still go over a little bit. It will be redundant information for you. Appium is a tool or a library which helps you automate your apps, but now we have more than Android and iOS. Now we have Windows and UI driver. UI driver is something which will help you automate your TV apps. So you can use Appium for that too. Windows driver is the new one. It still obeys JSON wire protocol, and whenever WebDriver is introduced, it will quickly adopt that. So we have language bindings in I think 6 languages that you can use to write your own tests using Appium. And now it's part of JS Foundation, and it's open source. It will always be open source. And now it belongs to JS Foundation after an exercise of getting copyrights, and it's donated to JS Foundation now. So let's go back to the past, 1 year rewind, and where were we in Appium project? I think a lot of you who are part of projects that are being rewritten, you will relate to this, that at some point your monolith applications are really slow to develop because it is hard to fix bugs, because now you have added layer on layer on layer, and there's a lot of code base that doesn't have tests to it. Appium had this specific problem because it is written in Nodejs. It had a lot of JavaScript gotchas that we will see that were part of Appium code base, and it were really hurting us. And after a point, each project has logs that are very hard to read. So I'm sure whenever you guys open the defect or a bug, the first thing an Appium core contributor would ask you is, can you provide us the logs? And then we would sit there triaging the issues, and we see at the logs, and it's very hard to read. It was a big problem for us. And then there was a lot of manual gatekeeping. What I mean by that, what I mean is whenever you raised a pull request, there was a lot of manual gatekeeping that was happening. So core contributor had to look at a lot of things, and if someone's on vacation, your pull request would stay there for a long time. And our build systems didn't work the way we wanted it to work, because we had a monolith application. So we had iOS, Android. So it was hard to configure as the build system. our developer documentation was not so good. I'll go into a little bit of details in the next slide about it. What I mean by that is, so you go into the GitHub, you're very excited on day one, you look at the code base, and then you have a README on the first page, but then as you go into the libraries, there is no README, right? It's very hard to understand what this specific file does, right? It's a problem in all the projects that go really big, and only few people know how everything works. And so we wanted to disseminate that information and help more contributors contribute to Appium. And now we were at a point where, so at that point we had Android UIAutomator, which was under the wraps, and UIAutomation, that's the instrumentation library which we used for Apple. Android came up with UIAutomator 2, and Apple came up with XCUI test. So now we had to add more drivers in the backend. And with that code base, it was really hard for us to add more drivers and more support. And we'll see what I mean by not modular. Cool. So this slide is, again, prior to 1.5 version, where this slide means that this is the whole Appium project. It's not modular. There is no separation of concern. So when you made a request to Appium, your request would go to a main Appium controller, and then it would be like, oh, it's iOS request. Then it would go to the iOS driver, or it goes to the Android driver. And lot of logic was repeated in iOS driver and Android driver, which were like the controllers and everything. So there was a lot of redundancy of logic that we had in this project. And after that, it made either UIAutomation or UIAutomator do the work to actually replicate that action on the device. So this was the project, and it was just one repo. It was really hard to read, and there was a lot of redundancy of code that were in iOS driver and Android driver. And now if we wanted to add more drivers to this, it meant we had to repeat the redundant code again in say, in UI driver or in Windows driver. So there was a lot of repetition that was needed. So then we, sorry, I'll go back. So then we thought, okay, what's the right thing to do? We can add more drivers to this and you reuse a lot of code. Not reuse, but rewrite a lot of code again. Or we can take a step back, think how we can rewrite the project in an ideal way. Then you're again excited. You think, okay, let me contribute to Appium. I know where things are. I know how code works. And then you go and look at all this. How many of you are JavaScript developers here? Right? Very few. JavaScript's a hard language? Maybe. JavaScript is a well-defined language? We don't know, right? Yeah, that's how it is. So this is one code piece that I tried to borrow from the old Appium project. Now you see there is prototypal inheritance, right? There can be functional inheritance. And then you see a lot of binds in this code. And now, on my day one, when I started with Appium project, I asked someone, why are there so many bind.this? What does this even mean? So it means that whenever there's an anonymous function, JavaScript cannot handle this really well. So it doesn't add the context of this to the anonymous function. And bind.this will help you add a context to it. And how many of you know what callback is here? Right? So what callback is in an asynchronous programming, you ask it to do a function, and then you pass a callback function. That is, after you have finished doing your code, now you have to call back this function, right? It shouldn't be that hard. And logging was again a problem because this was a monolith project. I think many of you will understand this, that when there's logs, it's very important to understand which part of your project that log is coming from, right? So that was not that was not really the case in Appium, the old Appium. So I'll not go into too much of JavaScript parts, but I had a few more things to tell here. And Appium test organization. So this was something that was really hurting us because as an Appium project, we wanted to be an ideal project where tests are organized the way it should be organized. At that time, we didn't have a lot of unit tests, right? Or we had unit tests, but there was no separation between what kind of a test is a test. What I mean by that was we were not running our test suites regularly because it was hard to run. There were a lot of functional tests and a lot of end-to-end tests that we had. So if you and I wanted to sit together and run all the functional tests, it would take a day or two for us to understand how to set this thing up and how we should do this. And we had no coverage reports either. So we had a problem that either the one functionality was tested a lot of times in Appium and few functionalities were not even tested because we didn't have that separation and test organization. So we were thinking, and then we had an offsite of all Appium core developers. We sat together. We thought, what would be the ideal architecture? What are the language features of new JavaScript that we want to use, so that we can make Appium code base really easy and make more contributions. And at the end of the day, we wanted Appium community to grow and have more contributors to Appium. So this was the new Appium, Appium 1.5, or after that, now it's 1.6.3 beta. So now this is a package overview. We have used npms, semver, and broke down Appium into very small packages, right? So majorly we have around 5. You can divide this into 5 components. And I think Christian Broman drew this, I guess, right? There are Selenium packages that all the drivers can use. That has mobile JSON wire protocol or JSON W proxy. There are a few Appium core packages that has the web app that really listens to your REST request and puts it on what it needs. There are now iOS packages. Now you will see iOS Xcode, iOS XUI test, or iOS driver. And there are now Android packages. It has also UIAutomator 2 now. So this looked really clean to us. That is like, now every repo has a good README. So everything you go into now, and then you can read the documentation and understand what each package does. So this is the new, so what we gained out of this? We gained out really a strong encapsulation. So now iOS driver shouldn't know about what JSON wire protocol is. There are well-defined interfaces, so we added a lot of tests for that. And now explicitly everything depends on each other. So these are primarily some decisions you need to make when you're going from a monolith to modular code or microservices, if you can relate to that. And now we had new Shiny JS. So if you didn't know what callback is, you shouldn't worry. All you need to understand is if a function has to do something asynchronously, you have to have an async keyword before the function. And whenever you're calling an async function, you have to wait for the function, and that's why you have to use a keyword called await. So whenever you're calling an asynchronous function, just use await before it. And for the logging, I think this is one lesson we learned, is we prefix the module name before the log. So whenever now we ask, can you give us the logs? Now it's very easy for us to say which exact part has the problem. And we try not to replicate error messages again and again, so that it's easy for us to debug the issues. And something like string templating, very simple, but makes your code base look really clean. And JavaScript didn't have concept of a constant or a let, or how the scope of a variable will behave if you use var. It was very non-intuitive, but now the new ES6, ES7 has let and constant that you can use.
and no more binds. So if you use a fat arrow for defining your anonymous function, this is already binded. So I have put this slide up so that if you had questions, if you wanted to contribute to Appium code, one Saturday evening you're like, I have my free time, let me look at Appium codebase. And now it should be fairly simple for you to read how this code, even if you're not a JavaScript developer, it's very simple and straightforward. I think JavaScript is one of the most easiest languages, but because you can do so many things in so many ways, it becomes complicated. But now it should be easier for you to read the code base. The testing pyramid. So if you're going from monolith to service-oriented microservices or service-oriented architecture or modular, you want to make sure that you have a lot of unit tests. So I think this is more often used as like, what should be my testing pyramid look like? You want very few end-to-end tests because end-to-end tests are really expensive. You want more integration tests so that your module, your service works fine with its explicit dependencies, right? Because you're separating the concern now. And you want a lot of unit tests. And now when you want to go in Appium and see so there will be a documentation about each module of what their interface is, but the easiest way to look is at unit tests, because unit tests will tell you what exactly all the units are, right? And if we don't run the tests, it's of no use. So now we have each module having a CI associated to it. So there is less manual gatekeeping because of that, because now we run unit tests on your each pull request. We run functional tests and end-to-end tests. And we also run the linters, because JavaScript is, again, a language which needs a linter. So the manual gatekeeping reduces, because now anyone can be confident that what you have contributed or what you have fixed is much better. And also modules has allowed us to have very clear boundaries of tests and what each module should do. So that is something that you can take away from this talk, is you have to make sure that your testing pyramid is a pyramid and not the inverted one. So, did we make mistakes? Of course we made mistakes, right? That's how we will learn. Even having an offsite and thinking very critically of how we want to do things, we made few mistakes. One mistake, we divided it into 50 modules now, and now it is paining us again. Though we got very good documentation, we had now separation of concerns, now we have the CI. But managing 50 modules, so you can still go modular, but have one repo. We intuitively thought each repo is each module. Now we had 50 repos inside the Appium project, and now it becomes insanely complicated if we wanted to make a change, something that everything uses, maybe something like JSON wire protocol. We made a change. Now we have to make sure that we make a change in something that depends on it, and then we have to make sure that the Android driver is changed, Android driver is changed, iOS driver is changed. So to make one fix, we have to go through like 5 pull requests, which is hard for context switching, which is hard for a lot of reasons. And we don't have a clean Git history now, because the contributions are across the repos. So if you're doing a microservice, you have to think critically about how many services you need, how many modules you need, how will you manage change that is across the repo. Is there an order involved in that? And when you have new developer joining your team, you again have to think, do I have enough documentation to explain how each piece talks to each other piece? And that is the onboarding. So we had the problem of onboarding earlier, that we had no documentation. Now we have a problem of onboarding because we have so much documentation, and what you should be concerned about. But still we got a lot out of it. So it was a still win. But now we thought, what should it actually looks like? So it should look pretty simple. And Appium 2.0 has this in its roadmap. It will come soon, where what we are planning is we will have
drivers divided into its own repo, and they will use Appium core packages, and it will use a base driver. So all the encapsulation and abstraction will be still part of Appium, but those will be encapsulated and abstracted in a base driver. So if you see this chart, you'll find few new things. One is UI engine driver, one is Windows driver, which was not part. One is XCUI test driver, which is new, and there is iOS driver. So our future looks very bright. Please help us contribute and grow as an Appium project, where we will have each driver have its own dependency, and everything will depend on base driver. And other important part of going in this direction is we want to grow each community. So if someone's not worried about Android and cares deeply about iOS, we want that developers not to switch context too much and just concentrate on XUI tests, so that we can have focused groups who can help Appium grow into a bigger project. So lessons that you can learn is please use test-driven development. If you are going from, so it's hard. Sometimes you don't have, so what I do is, honestly, sometimes it's not possible. So what I do is I write a failing test if I write a feature, right? So that's very similar that you can get. But if you are going from a monolith project into modules or service-oriented, microservices or service-oriented projects, make sure that you write tests from day one. And if you write tests for your living and full time, make sure that you embed in your agile teams and make sure that you force them that let me write tests after each iteration, or let me write tests even before, right? So if you write, and make sure that you follow the test pyramids. You want a lot of unit tests and few end-to-end tests, because it will not bite you in the future. And think critically about how you want to arrange your tests, because that is very important. Like how many unit tests you want each, and if you cannot write unit tests, will you write integration tests? If you write integration tests, are there mocks in present? So because integration tests might need mock from other repos, so you need to be very careful about that. And as part of the testing team, or someone who's very deeply passionate about test, make sure that you run tests as often as possible. Maybe in each pull request. Maybe you can use plugins like Gulp, so that whenever you write your JavaScript code or any code, it just runs on every change. And one important lesson that we got was micro repos are not micro modules, or micro repos are not microservices. It's something that was non-intuitive, but it's an anti-pattern, but it's true. Be iterative and agile, because you can only progress fast if you're iterative, and waterfall is dinosaurs now, I guess. Make sure you have a lot of log documentation, and think critically about logging, because now if you're using tools which use your logs, you don't want to pay for a lot of logs collection. So make sure you precisely log. You log where your micro module is. Maybe we used a prefix. You can have another strategy of how you want to look at logging. Yeah, and I wanted to spend some time on how you can contribute, because I know a lot of you want to contribute to Appium project but don't know where to start. On the Appium repo, there is a contribution page. So we have open meetings now. That means you can join in any meeting of the sprint planning. So we work in sprints. We have a roadmap. You can join in the Zoom channel and then get onboarded. The first thing is, if you find a bug, please report it. Otherwise, we would never know. And please make sure that you keep bugging someone if your bug is something bugging you, right? Because it's a community-driven project. Also, if you have a solution, if you have faced something in past, you have looked at the forum, you didn't have an answer, now you have an answer, please go and write the answer, because someone is going through again the cycle of that. And please help triage the issues. There is a good README about how you want to help Appium project triage the issues. That's the easiest way to get into the Appium project. And now we have the open sprint. So really you can use, you can be part of every sprint of Appium. And yeah, that should be all. Any questions?
There was a lot of talk yesterday about browser vendors contributing to the browser drivers and stuff for Selenium. Have you guys had any interest from the mobile vendors like Google or Apple contributing to their drivers?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's our future and that's our vision. But good news is Microsoft has written Windows driver, and we are really trying really hard for other vendors. So as Selenium project took that much time, and probably Appium in future will have that direction too. So.
What's the difference between UIAutomator and UIAutomator 2?
Yeah. So UIAutomator so both are provided by Google to write functional tests. And Appium is just a wrapper over UIAutomator. UIAutomator has been discontinued, and UIAutomator 2 is the new project that Google Google uses, or Google recommends you to write functional tests. So that is why UIAutomator 1 would be deprecated. So functionally it would just work fine. It's just the new Google's library to automate things.
So while using Appium, I think one of the biggest challenges we saw in another talk has been setup. Okay. Are there any revamps or refactor being done for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the setup, partly the issue with the setup is it requires a lot of configuration on your computer. So one way to look at it is using like Docker, which was explained in yesterday's part. But we're trying really hard to have more documentation. And once we will have communities that are around specific mobile vendor, I think we will have better documentation, easier setup. So, is there any other question? Cool. Thank you.